I beg your pardon, the global markets as well. Commodities is what we actually touched upon. Now, in terms of the US inflation, let's talk about that. In a major shot in the arm of the US consumer markets, the retail inflation for the month of May has come in at 4%, which is much lower and the lowest that we have seen in terms of the last 2 years for the US inflation. Now, the CPI increased just 0.1% in the month gone by, making it the smallest increase since March 2021. Now, let's go across and listen into Manish Singh, also the Chief Investment Officer at Crossbridge Capital, sharing his take on the same as well.
Always been saying that inflation is not a problem. I mean, what you will really face is disinflation that's coming down the line. So this CPI report clearly has a Fed pause written all over it, given the numbers we have seen. So it's highly unlikely that they're going to increase rates when they conclude their meeting tomorrow. The focus should shift to a pivot, but the pivot likely is not going to come at this meeting, probably not even at next meeting, but that is the next thing that everyone has to focus on. Few other things to look at, because if you look at the PPI number in China is already pointing to disinflation. It's at minus 4.6%. So the news this morning that China is considering a stimulus didn't come as a surprise to me, because when you see this inflation number, then you have to get the inflation higher or get the price level higher, and that's what China will try to do. So the Fed will clearly be looking in terms of, first, they'll be relieved that inflation is not a problem. It hasn't been a problem for some time, but at least in the headline number, they will be relieved. But the next focus for them is to avoid U.S. recession. Because if the interest rate stays where it is now, 5.25, look at the ISM services number. ISM services number was holding up really well, but that is now down to 50.3. ISM manufacturing is already at 46, i.e. in contraction zone. So the key focus for US is going to be to avoid a recession, or if there is a recession, then keep it shallow, and that is where the Fed is going to be focused. Well, I wouldn't really see the US dollar massively impacted. I mean, we have seen the weakness that US dollar had recently after a huge amount of strength, as you saw in cyclical way. From here on, I think in terms of interest rate differential, given, and now FX, of course, we have to bear in mind, in FX, 3 months is a long term and 1 month is short term. So you have to bear that in mind compared to equity market, where it tend to be longer term.
That's the word coming in on the US CPI inflation trend. But with the key inflation figures out of the way then, investors are now eyeing Fed's rate hike decision. Policymakers are poised to pause their hiking of interest rates for the first time in 15 months while retaining a tightening bias. With inflation still too hot and flaring uncertainty around the economic outlook, a breather from those rate hikes looks to be on the cards, albeit it may be a very short-lived hiatus.
Okay, and let's keep it with those central banks, because what happened is the People Bank of China has gone ahead and surprised the street by cutting their short-term lending rate for the first time in 10 months. This with a view to restore the confidence in the equity markets and to fuel the post-pandemic recovery for the second largest economy. The cut also signals towards a possible easing of long-term lending rates, as well as amid the weakening sentiment and demand.
Tracking some more macro cues across the globe then, and New Zealand's economy may have contracted for a second consecutive quarter, putting it into recession sooner than the central bank had expected. The GDP fell 0.1% in the first quarter, and the central bank last month signaled it was done tightening after raising rates by 25 basis points to the highest in more than 14 years at 5.5%, ending its most aggressive hiking cycle since 1999.
And, talking about more macros, but on the commodities front, you have the Europe's benchmark natural gas prices, which fell for the second day in a row amid the tepid industrial demand and comfortable inventories. The price of European gas benchmark rose as much as 20%, extending a run that began last week. Remember, the benchmark has declined 90% since the peak of the energy crisis.
Shifting focus then, and Disney has announced a major rejig in its release dates, adding a new Star Wars movie and a Moana live-action adaptation to the schedule and delaying the next 3 Avatar movies by a whole year. Based on the recently rejigged timeline, the final Avatar movie is coming a whole of 22 years after the original 2009 blockbuster.
Moving on to some update coming in from the football world. Why? Because Manchester United shares soared over 10% after reports suggested that the bid from Qatar was likely to be accepted. Now, the Qatari media reported that Sheikh Jassim, the son of country's former Prime Minister, is poised to be announced as the preferred bidder of the Premier League football club. His final offer was reported to have been around $6.3 billion for total control of the Manchester United club.